Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. And it's Tuesday, the 24th of February, 9:51 p.m. So I notice as I look back at the podcast that I've been, focusing on several things for the last week or two, um, with few exceptions. And today I asked myself a question. What do I expect people to do with this information? Why why even share this information, you know? And there's many parts to that answer. It's not a simple question. And it has to do with everything, you know? It has to do with everything. Everything I've been saying, everything I've been writing about, everything I've captured, my 125, 126-year theory, 146 actually, so my theory is 1880 to now. Not that I can vouch for any reality before 1880. I can't tell you it was an idyllic world and we lost it, we blew it up. I'm only referencing the timeline we've been on, the various inventions that were adopted, the ones that were discarded, why we made the decisions we made, where I think all of this is leading, why I think the Abrahamic religions are agents in this, why I think prophecy has become a farce rather than being a message given through a human being to potentates. And that's the way it used to work, is that somebody removed from power circles would be selected by God to provide a message to people and to the potentates that rule the region in which the prophet operates. Now, the concept of a prophet is difficult for me. I don't really believe in prophecy. The whole Western tradition seems a bit stupid to me. No intend, no intention to offend, just simply to speak my heart and my mind. Stupid, okay? So what happens to a prophet after he's delivered his message? Does the prophet just go off and live some kind of normal life as a sheep herder? In the traditions I study, once you experience God, God is always with you. The prophet is kind of like, a FedEx messenger of God. And the odd thing about the Abrahamic tradition is from the time of Judea onward, we have had priestcraft. We have had men and women who dedicate their lives to the pursuit of God, to the structure of God in their own lives, to be examples to other people. But generally, the people who take up these lives of monastic tradition in the West, it's like God ignores those people, and the prophets always come from outside of those communities, right? Now, by the way, this is a global phenomenon. I don't want to give the idea that this is just in the West. So let's take one of the a really good 20th century example of a God-infused human being, a human being so immersed at the level of consciousness with the body of God that she and God are hardly indistinguishable. And she may fulfill the notion of God in flesh or God made human, as they say of the Christ, which to me has always signified the immersion of consciousness in God. Okay? That means all traces of individuality are sort of taken away. Aspects of the person's cultural roots will persist until they die. But if you were to ever meet such a person, you would immediately note that they transcend their culture, that they are a culture unto themselves. They are the first and last culture. They're God, the creator. So here I'm speaking about Madhyama, and in a sense, and another good one is Meher Baba, but we'll focus on Madhyama tonight. So they say that Madhyama was born with God, and that signs of it could be seen in her early childhood. That she would go into these trances and just be sort of in a samadhi state for hours. We hear similar stories of mystics and saints in the Catholic Church and Eastern Orthodox Church as well, especially the Russian version of it. Many, many people like this have been born in the Eastern Orthodox community. Anybody brought around them physically who is ill is healed, whether it's the intent of the God-afflicted person to heal them or not. So this is a natural, if you've been listening to me long enough, you'll start to notice that I just tell things the way they are. That's my goal. I'm not trying to make anything up. I'm not trying to convert anybody to anything. If anything, I would hope that my words and my podcast and my books serve as a reminder that we as human beings have a creator that we can consciously engage and eventually merge into as consciousness. I suppose you can do it physically too. I mean, if you've ever seen the stories of the Tibetan Buddhists converting into their light bodies, and one of these things was actually documented in the early mid-90s by a Jesuit. I don't know if it was in Tibet. I think it was in Dar es Salaam, where the Tibetan community moved in India. And I think this aspect of our lives is extremely important. I think it balances everything else out. I'm not anti-scientific. I think the scientific method and the rigors of objectivity that it has put upon the human race are largely beneficial. Not totally beneficial, but largely. beneficial. I do not believe that scientism was ever supposed to become a guiding life principle, a philosophy, or a substitute for a religion or a spiritual path. And yet I know, and you know, that many people live within this mindset. And the faith involved is, well, we may not figure it out in my generation, but the discipline of living this way within radical objectivity will eventually yield the answers. And I place my faith in the human race on this road of deconstruction, experimentation, and scientism, or science proper, to dispel all ignorance and reveal all truth about human beings and the world and the reality that we live in. So it sounds beautiful, actually, when you think about it. I mean, it sounds very philosophically sound, you know? So what's the problem with it? Well, it ignores the burden of consciousness in its totality and pigeonholes human beings into rationality. When the truth is, we live in an irrational world and we live in an irrational reality. The reality we live in is irrational because we as human beings are irrational and we're co-creating it. Every generation of man is co-author to the living hologram that it exists in. And it's not purely objective. It interacts with human consciousness. And this is something that science just is loath to admit, to experiment upon, or to celebrate. And what this creates is a hardening of the heart. Because the object truth as defined by science and as defined by the rigor of scientific method can and will never reveal the inner secrets of the human. And where science attempts to do so, or might I say, pseudoscience, like psychiatry, like psychology, it makes a mockery of consciousness and reduces it to just the basest of elements. It got hit, it got bruised. This is the way the mind heals. You never, I mean, there's some truth to it, but it is at the end of the day a profound limitation of what a human being is. And so the Talamanca Review and the various books published are here to remind you that you have an obligation to go within yourself, to sit quietly, close your eyes, and spend time within yourself and journey into your own consciousness. And anybody who has taken this up with sincerity and persisted has yielded results. It is a universal paradigm. And one of the things that we notice about this world is that it's godless. Now, one of the first people in line to be critical of organized religion. But one thing I don't often say on the Talamanca Review is that religions served a function, and that function was a moral compass for society and a general consensus of what a functioning human heart was, what human responsibility was, and what human compassion was. And somehow this morphed into a very mutated form of liberalism, Marxism, socialism, and communism. That's what happened to it. And one of the reasons it happened is one of the guard posts of Western civilization, the church, and specifically the Catholic Church, because it is still the mother of Western Europe. The Renaissance is the Enlightenment is only 300 years old. There's 2,000 years in the history of the Catholic Church. And when that voice and that pillar was taken out of our society, things started to go off the rails in a very bad way. And now we're a godless people. And a godless people have no defense because God is the first defense. It doesn't matter how you conceptualize God. It could be a shamanic structure in a tribe. It could be Islam. It could be Judaica. It could be Catholicism, Christianity in general. It could be Buddhism. You know? Could be any one of those things, but what they represent are reminders that the human being has a creator and that the creator loves us. And most importantly, we are held responsible for our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions while we are in a body. And there's an accounting involved, whether it be the Eastern system or the Western system. They're both accounting systems. How did you use the energy in the hologram? How did you use the energy of the creator coming into you? How old were you when you lost conscious connection with the creator? Because all children have it. Why did you not struggle to get that connection back? That truth and that recaptured innocence? Why'd you let it go? How did your life go when you let it go? And so there are times that my words on the Talamanca Review may sound remarkably similar to articulate and infamous atheists like Christopher Hitchens and like Richard Dawkins. But really, I'm at the other end of the spectrum. So why do our words sound the same? Well, I think Malachi Martin nailed it in those Art Bell interviews, which are captured in the Martin tapes. So the system of prophecy was working, except instead of the human agent, which is generally the form of translation from God to man and man's power hierarchies, and that transitional point, that communication point in the Jewish system is usually a prophet. And the prophets are not rabbis. Rabbis are people who study the prophets and other rabbis. It's become very postmodern, the whole Jewish system, and quite reptilian, actually. So in the modern version of prophecy within Catholicism, we don't get the human agent, we get the spiritual agent. And in the case of the prophecy of Fatima, we get Mary, the mother of Christ. Allegedly. I mean, if you believe it. And, I do believe it. It doesn't change my mind about the Catholic Church. But I do believe Malachi Martin is telling the truth, that the Vatican II, the only thing he doesn't say and really come out and talk about, perhaps because he doesn't know. Because remember, to be a learned man in the 1970s meant a copious amount of time, energy, and resource committed to reading. And reading necessitated books, and books necessitated money to buy the books. And so a man with a large library was a learned man. But there was nowhere near the access to information we have now in the digital age. And Martin, he didn't really comprehend the digital age. I mean, it was just starting. I didn't have the internet in my home until 1997. So that's almost 30 years ago. You have to give me a moment. The dogs are going crazy here. Lord knows what gets into those dogs. Um, where was I? These interruptions can be difficult. So the purpose of the church, religious and moral leadership. And look, there's something in my rambling criticisms of these institutions and their efficacy for propelling consciousness towards knowledge and understanding and immersion in the divine. And I think the knowledge and understanding is important as well. One of the things that I may have overlooked, and I've referenced this before on the Talamanca Review, is the cultural importance of religion and the cultural importance of these principles. And again, one of the things that made me realize this is, again, Malachi Martin. And boy, was he ever an effective priest. Okay? And another thing that we have to remember is that mysticism and meditation is for a very serious individual. So if that's your path, then walk it. And you will be alone. You will find company in the world, sometimes among the living, other equally ardent practitioners and seekers, and sometimes among the dead, people who have led a similar life in a different epoch of man and history. And either they or someone else documented their existence because it was remarkable, and they were on the same inwardly directed path. But religion is sort of the baseline of morality and where society meets God. And the key word is society. It's everybody. Yeah, I can't even believe I'm saying this out loud on the Talamanca Review, but I don't think there's any way to save the West without bringing back Christianity and recognizing whether you practice that religion, whether you've gone through the sacraments of that religion, which are um, baptism, first communion, first confession, confirmation, and then follow the sacraments into your later life with marriage in the church and death in the church, the funeral. But there's nothing else can really replace Christianity. And I don't think the generations that led us to this point really understood what they were doing. I really don't. If they could, come back now in 2026, or if they're of sufficient years in their life, that they have living memory that goes back into cultural Christianity, and they're honest with themselves, I feel quite certainly that they would see the absence of this cultural Christianity. But in the beginning of the Martin tapes, the book discusses his upbringing in Kerry, 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 Ireland. And he describes it as the foundation of his faith. And it's really beautiful. It's poetic. And he talks about a Catholicism that is not lived in the churches, but lived in daily life among the merchants, the tradesmen, the craftsmen, the farmers, the civil servants, whomever they may be. But they made a sincere attempt to bring this love of the Creator into their lives and into their community in their behavior. And believe it or not, I see aspects of this deep Catholicism in Costa Rica as well, where when you greet people and you say, "How are you today?" they say, "Very good, thanks be to God." And they mean it. And the way they treat each other, there's a sort of a religious communion there. Everything is done with a kind of love, and it's not really a human love. It's a deferential love. And the deference is to God, the great love. And it's been all around me for a decade here. My wife has it in spades. And all those things have been lost now, and there's nothing to replace them. There's nothing to replace this reminder to love. There's no reminder to love in science. Science is completely and utterly indifferent to love. There's no science of love. And yet science comes out of a society predicated upon the Prince of Love, which was Christ. And so we have my number one fan. Uh, my son and I both agree that there's no other race of dog we would go to. Once you get to know the American Staffordshire Terrier, and part of the reputation is warranted, but it's a little bit overstated, right? But there's just such beautiful animals. Yeah, just absolutely beautiful, powerful creatures. There he is in the back there. If you can see him. Oh no, he's choosing the spot that he's going to sleep in. And so we lost all of these things. And these things once lost are very difficult to get back. They're very difficult to get back. And because God is real, if God is forgotten in the conscious mind, the unconscious mind does not forget God. And it produces certain attitudes and behaviors. Chief amongst these attitudes and behaviors is the respect that you receive. So I can tell you, as I moved through various religious communities in my life, like the Sufis, if they had the slightest inkling that you were sincere in your pursuit of God, they treated you with the highest respect. Didn't matter that you weren't Muslim, just that the sincerity was there, that you addressed this great question in life. I imagine, and I'm just speaking aloud here, but I imagine much of the Muslim world, which still has God, and God still serves them well through their cultural expression of Islam, much of the Muslim world looks upon the West with pity and disgust, because that's how the godless are seen by those who have God. And the godless are defined by their actions. They only live for themselves. And so the question becomes, how do you produce a less self-centered person in the absence of spiritual culture? I think the answer is obvious based on a cursory glance of the world we live in now. And the answer is, you can't. And then you get very misunderstood understandings of compassion, secular expressions of spirituality, like the pseudo love of the support of institutional agendas. Okay? So those who support immigration based on compassionate principles. Compassion and institutions don't go together. Compassion is what you express in your personal life. That's it. You can't conceptualize compassion and propagate it into reality through government policy. And this is another stupid thing the West did, right? And this is what's created all these leftist retards now. And I don't mean to be diminutive in my expression of them, but they're retarded. They're not connecting with reality properly. So it is the nature of man to love. And probably this can be seen most clearly, or used to be able to be seen most clearly, in smaller communities. And one of the reasons love was more expressive in those communities, cultural love, caring for one another, was there was no anonymity in a small town. But even that's all gone now. The drugs took that away from us. The Oxycontin, the fentanyl. A free society can only be maintained by free people, and the only thing that gives human beings freedom is God. You can't really be free absent God. You may think you are, but you're not. Only God gives liberation. Only God gives freedom. I know this sounds more like a religious sermon than something more closely related to meditation or spiritual phenomenon, like all the stuff I experienced writing my books. And I don't want it to sound like a religious sermon. But yet the principles I'm speaking aloud are true. I can't deny them. They're absolutely true. So, to answer the question I asked at the beginning of the podcast, what are these words I utter meant to do? How do I want them to affect you? Well, I suppose I'm documenting the absence of God. But in existence, in physical existence, there can be no there can be no vacuums. Mental, conceptual, or physical. All physical space will be used by something, save perhaps the frozen poles. But even there's life that we don't fully comprehend. So because human beings were built and constructed in such a way that there was a space left inside us that can only be filled by what our human culture has termed God, other non-human cultures have different terms for it, you know, the creator, the great isness, the being, which are all ways of describing the indescribable, which is life moment to moment. And I don't think they're any further ahead in understanding what that is or where it comes from, any of these races, no matter how technologically advanced they are. I'm sure they can deconstruct a physical body, rebuild the physical body, transport human consciousness as represented by memories into a new physical structure, a synthetic or organic structure. I'm sure they've mastered cloning. I'm sure they know all about the wormholes and how to move about the universe. But it doesn't mean they know any more than about life than we do. So I suppose that's my rather long opening salvo. Maybe I should not move to another topic and just finish up on this one because time is brief. So we have to make room for God in our lives. Okay. That's all prayer is. is the acknowledgement that you have a creator and the belief that you can communicate with that creator and the belief that that creator hears or understands your communications and responds. And every time you pray, even informally on a streetcar or a bus or a subway, you're sanctifying that space inside a human being that was created to seek and to understand. And transposing this to science and think this is the final transitional phase of this human impulse of exploration and seeking is ridiculous. And yet we live in a society where these things are never spoken about anymore. Now, I posted a 15 or a 17-minute YouTube video titled My Neighbor on Substack. And it was a short video from my neighbor on the other side of the Talamanca Mountains, fielding questions from the acolytes who go to find some grace in his presence and in the vibrational space he's created at his ashram, which I am quite certain is very beautiful. And I noticed something in that video. I noticed something so glaring and so apparent that it needs to be said. And it is that I do not believe anymore that spiritual societies should be separated from society proper. And we see the result now. Right? So finishing up on the Vatican narrative, we need to understand that the Vatican II was imposed upon the Vatican. Okay? That was, in essence, a treaty, if you will, and the consequence of the Vatican's actions in World War II, and really the end of the church. Things are what they are. You can't change them because there are fashionable ideas about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The truth of the human experience is the truth of the human experience. So it was Vatican II that I think really brought all the darkness into the church. I think it was done deliberately, and I think it was done to defrock the church as an entity. And I think this is what the third prophecy of Fatima was. And I think Malachi Martin is correct in chastising the half dozen popes who have known about this prophecy since 1964 and have, or much earlier. The prophecy came in the 1930s, and it was meant to be delivered in the 60s, in the early 60s. And they didn't deliver it. They didn't tell the truth. In a sense, they betrayed themselves. The church, in a sense, was probably one of the first political forces on the planet to get Epsteined. And then come the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And this is when all the abuse started with the children. Where did that come from? And it's as Malachi Martin said, the truly faithful in the church were overlooked for advancement, and the political structures of the church were populated with DEI hires, DEI bishops, DEI cardinals. They were the first institution to get Epstein. Well, my number one fan wants to leave again. Pretty finicky, everybody. It's amazing, when you grow up Catholic and you get baptized and you go to your first confession and your first communion and your confirmation. It's sort of culturally, I don't think you can escape it. I think that culturally, I will be Catholic till the day I die. But it's as I wrote in The Devil in Us, the moment I saw that poster on meditation and I commenced that path, something dramatic changed. But culturally and socially, I suppose I'll always be Catholic. And I was made aware of this doing the Malachi Martin book, the Martin tapes. How much I still am culturally Catholic. And how much of what Malachi Martin explained was meaningful to me, as it should be to any Christian. We're on a windy road now, a windy road to an end of something. The only question remaining is what is going to end. I do not believe all of this new age nonsense and the the blathering idiocy of people on Gaia and Matthias DeStefano and Andrew Bartzis. These people cannot replace the organization and the structure of generational religious culture. Are you kidding me? They don't have the character, they don't have the resources, and they don't have the grace. Psychic parlor tricks are not a substitute for God. Astrology is not a substitute for God. Gematria is not a substitute for God. God is God. Yeah, be kidding me. Dude thinks I'm his concierge or something. We live in very dark times, and I document them, which is why much of the stuff I talk about is dark. Oh, come on. Hey, cut the shit now, okay? But here's the beauty of darkness. If I lived on a suburban street and I had a concrete front veranda on my house, And it had a couple of outdoor chairs there and a little circular table and, well, like those places in Brooklyn, where people sit in front of the house and watch people go by and stuff like that. Like any suburb, like the West End of Toronto, like anything. If it was 12 o'clock noon on a cloudless day in July, and I lived maybe 15 meters from the road, my front yard wasn't that big, and there was a sidewalk, a little patch of lawn, and then the veranda. And there was a car going by every 30 seconds or 30 seconds, let's say. Every half minute, a car would go by at about, let's say, 30 or 40 kilometers an hour, 20 miles an hour. And let's say on that cloudless July day at noon, I had a candle lit on the little table on the front veranda of my house. How many cars driving by do you think would notice that candle? None. That light would go unnoticed. Now you take that same suburban area, you make it nighttime, you take away all the lights in the city, you take away the lights of the cars, or forget the cars completely, people are walking. How many people would be able to pass that house and not immediately notice a lit candle? Everybody would notice the candle. And that's the purpose of darkness, is to allow you to see the light that you've overlooked. It's that simple. Everything works together. There's the enmity of the Christian scriptures is something that I find farcical. Good versus evil, angels versus demons. That's all an extraterrestrial story anyways. Demons are reptilians, but I mean there are demons as well, but the really nasty stuff is generally reptilian. So that's what the darkness does. It allows you to see a small candle lit. And why? Because you can see even the dimmest of lights from a great distance in darkness. And so, in a sense, as co-creators of this reality we live in, we author these periods of darkness when we forget God. And the calamity, the violence, the tragedy, the sorrow, the weeping, and the gnashing of teeth, these are all the consequence of this forgetting. And when everything's going good, it's easy not to think about this stuff. I mean, you'd have to be really trying to think about God in the 70s, the 80s, or the 90s when everybody was making money. And you notice that a lot of religious and spiritual thought is coming back now. It's the old adage, right? Hard times make hard men make great societies, soft times make soft men, and it collapses societies. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.